for kind of like the second bite of the apple for Andrew today. This is round 2, so basically I get to ask all the questions that Kieran forgot or didn't word well enough. But we kind of went straight into the nitty gritty of what you're kind of working on at the moment at Index, and I wanted to just go back in time a little bit because I think like a lot of people might not know the Index origin story, and which kind of started with like a little baby Andrew, right? Like, can you just walk us through very quickly like how Index came to be?
Definitely. I often, like, you can't talk about the origin of Index without talking about my origin, and yeah, I've often referred to it as like little Andrew or baby Andrew, but if you're not familiar with my story, I'll be quick. I got my start in adtech really just by complete accident on the internet, on the web in the 90s. In the late 90s, I made websites. I was a kid, and some of those websites got super popular, so much so that early ad tech quite literally found me and was like, hey, these are like salespeople or BD people that we might employ today at Index. Looks like you have a pretty popular website. Have you considered putting an ad on it? We'll give you money.
And what were the websites? Like what were you creating?
Well, my most popular, a lot of them were around television. So I made like websites about television, and my most popular was a website called 3 Big Shows. You can look it up on the Wayback Machine. It was about like Survivor and a bunch of those shows. And so they were like, hey, we'll basically put an ad tag on your website and give you money. If you're a kid and you hear this, you get very excited. I was very excited, and so very quickly I fell into the rabbit hole of ad tech, and 25-ish years later, I haven't left. So I think it just speaks to how exciting ad tech is. Yeah, for sure.
Making money.
But somewhere along the way, I wanted to, instead of being what I've kind of characterized as a humble publisher, to support publishers, which is why we founded the original company.
And when was the kind of the rebrand?
To Index?
Yeah.
So we started the company in 2003 as Casale Media. Back then, just about everybody in ad tech was an ad network, sell side, buy side, everyone kind of did everything. And ran that right into the early emergence of real-time bidding and data-driven advertising. That was like 2007, 2009. As the agency holding companies started to build trade desks, as DSPs emerged, it was sort of this interesting inflection point in the market, which was, on one hand, you had some ad networks that were just doubling down as being an ad network and servicing both sides of the market, but on the other hand, you had a market that was bifurcating, where platforms were servicing the needs of publishers, platforms were servicing the needs of agencies. For us, it made a lot of sense to double down on the side of the market that we knew the best, the sell side. And so we set ourselves on this path to building Index. Before we called it Index, it started by having conversations very early on in 2010 and 2011 with the early DSPs. So it was like Joe Zawadzki at MediaMath, the early Invite Media team, Brian at AppNexus. And it was a kind of an interesting moment in time as we were pivoting the company to talk to DSPs who really thought it was odd that we were calling them, because they were like, we're kind of here to replace you guys. Even back then I was viewed as a dinosaur, which is sort of interesting because I wasn't one. But we pulled it off and we renamed the company to Index in 2015. And at that point, that culminated the full transformation of the business from being an ad network to an exchange where every dollar was sourced programmatically vis-a-vis a bid request.
And something that's kind of unusual about Index relative to your competitor set, you've taken on no VC money. Was that an active decision? I'm guessing that wasn't by choice, by design at first, but I'm sure that the people have come knocking.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like if you kind of look at a lot of ad tech, and this is certainly not the case universally, and there are exceptions to this rule, there is this little web around so many origin stories of companies in ad tech where there is a close-knit community, especially of VCs, but also angels, where a lot of ad tech companies are a few degrees away from each other. And I'm talking about early, ad tech over the last 2 decades. Index was sort of this interesting, complete independent outsider where we were not part of that community. We weren't part of the
New York for one,
we weren't
right?
part of the New York Alley. We weren't part of the California Valley. We weren't part of Madison Avenue. We were this random company from Canada. I was based in Toronto, who just wanted to do it anyway. And to some degree, as a result, we weren't in those circles. Were we approached along the way? Did we reach out to the community? Absolutely. I'd say like there was a couple of challenges. The first was it was very evident in any early VC conversation that we had. The VCs wanted to understand how the business was going to make an enormous margin, which was always antithetical to my strategy, because my strategy was we have to support publishers. So we weren't actually the best investment, quite frankly, I think in those early days, because we weren't really here to build a company to try to find a way to pay as much of our capital back to the investors as possible. We're trying to build a company to support publishers. So that was interesting, but the other was just we weren't part of that community at all. We were complete outsiders. We were kind of written off for that reason as well. But I think now we stand as this interesting testimony or case study for like, you can still go out on your own and do it yourself. It just takes a lot longer, and that's why we're 20 years old now.
And is your corporate structure different to some of those companies? Do you have a board?
Completely different. We don't technically have an official board. We obviously have a board. It's my father and myself, and he's effectively retired, so not really.
So who keeps you in check?
So what's very unique about Index is we sort of replace traditional structures with our own. So at the company, my executive leadership team, you could almost look as our board. We make a lot of decisions together around the table. It's very democratic. I don't just rule with an iron fist. Lara, our CMO, who you'll probably find here at some point, is very good at keeping me in check as well. But our ELT, I think, they do run the company in a way that mirrors some of the mechanics you might see from a board. And then we swap out the traditional investor, who a lot of ad tech companies are designed to pay back, with our customer. And I think that's kind of unique because, instead of an ad tech company trying to find a new feature or new margin to try to eke out some more profit, we're trying to find a way to get more ad spend to our customer, the publisher. So that's sort of how we operate. We're a little bit different and a little bit unconventional in that respect.
I think some people might kind of look at you kind of with sideways eyes when you say that, though. Like, is that always going to remain the same? Can you get to the next level without a more defined corporate structure, without taking on outside investment? Kieran mentioned an IPO earlier, potentially down the line.
I'll say a few things. It's like, people have been saying that about us for a while, but we're 20 years in, and we're going to process about $2 billion in ad spend this year. So at some point, like, maybe our way does work. But you can check me on that in 5 years. I suspect the number will be a lot bigger. I think, like, to a large extent, unconventional structures are foreign to a lot of people, but doesn't mean they're wrong. And I think if you would look at ad tech generally, a lot of the market looks unfavorably on ad tech. And a lot of the ad tech structures actually have done a terrible job servicing the customer. So unconventional thinking might actually be appropriate for this particular market. We'll see. To the IPO comment, look, I think I have said publicly before, we do see a future state for Index as a public index, but we are in no rush and we're on no time horizon for that. We just think it's appropriate at some point to list ourselves alongside those companies, if for no other reason than to provide a really interesting comp to the market. If you look at Index's revenue base compared to our media spend, we look completely different than every other ad tech company that exists. We're doing it in a far more efficient way. We're able to process a lot more ad spend and keep a lot less, and we think it's a lot healthier, and we think it's a model that is more sustainable long-term for this market, and I think that's the comp that we'll bring to the public markets whenever we decide that's the appropriate time. But we're not looking to be another SSP as Pubco 3, and so to that end, like, we're on no fixed timeline at this point.
So what is the differentiator then? Is it the fact that you own your own server farms, for example? Like, what is separating you from the pack in that regard?
I would argue we're by far the most efficient platform in the market globally. Our superpowers are efficiency and scale, which is correct if you think of somebody in the category of the exchange. But I think ultimately it's also the innovative spirit behind the company. Like, we have the best people innovating at Index. We have an incredibly gifted product and engineering team that are building all kinds of new solutions all the time. We're part of a lot of industry shifts and standards that continue to happen. If you look back 10 years ago, everything to do with the header, we were very, very entwined with. If you look back to standards like S-Chain, ads.txt, payer disclosure, we were very progressive there. If you look at what we're doing right now in streaming, bringing the pod into programmatic, solving live spikes, which are hugely punishing right now, and then everything that I was talking about with Kieran on sell-side decisioning and building a market on top of the existing plumbing of infrastructure of ad tech. Like, we're very big on, like, if something is broken or we spot a problem, we find a new and innovative way to solve it instead of just live with it. And I think that sets us apart. And I think we've been time and again with a lot of big shifts in this market. So I think that's like fundamentally the why. But otherwise, like I think also we know what we are. Like I say to the company a lot, maybe more than I should, the future destiny of Index is a very boring business. And I don't think that any CEO in ad tech agrees with me, and I think that's fine. I think that's why we're a little bit different. I think over time, these platforms will process an incredible amount of money, take very little, and be very boring. If you look at NYSE or NASDAQ, those businesses are not super sexy. They don't get a lot of credit. You kind of ignore them. They process trillions of dollars and take very little. I think that's the future of ad tech, and I also think like that just very sensible, pragmatic approach to operations is also what sets us apart and what keeps us super closely linked to the customer.
And that's what Wall Street likes, right? Like boring, very predictable businesses. And I mean, do you think that's maybe where some other ad tech companies have gone wrong by trying to kind of weave narratives and shift where stay where the puck is going, rather than just focusing on the grind, so to speak?
It's all too easy. Like it's really easy to get greedy in this market, and I think that is part of the problem, and it's very tempting. I think when ad tech platforms get into processing billions of dollars, and they realize that very little stay in their coffers, some smart CFO at the company or somebody on the board is like, have you considered an interesting new business problem to solve, an interesting product to bring forward to keep a little bit more of that.
Us, right.
And like to some degree, I think resisting the temptation is hard. And then if you add to that public pressures, like I hear this a lot, we have it so easy at Index because we don't have public pressures. And I'm like, well, really? Like it also took us 20 years to get here, but sure. But if you resist that, you're in a very different operating mode. But I think that's part of it. I think it's very easy to be tempted to potentially just drift the business into an orbit that might allow you to just keep more of the money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't want your kind of like metaverse moment either, right? Like,
that's fair. Look, like that Mark's avatar though was pretty sweet. So I'm surprised
apart
that didn't
from the legs,
take off.
which didn't exist. So another way, another area in which I guess kind of like you've resisted the norm has been largely on M&A. You've largely kind of sat on the sidelines. You have a corp dev department. You've made one acquisition. Can you talk me through, because again, that's another way of adding revenue to your business. That's another, that's inorganic growth. Why resist that?
I think it comes back to the focus comment. Like we're really focused on what we are at Index, and so it's kind of hard for us to acquire something today that will keep us as focused and strictly accelerate Index. We're in every channel. We have a very well-scaled platform globally. We maintain our own infrastructure, and so for us, when we're thinking about M&A, it's how can we solve a unique problem that keeps us in that focus orbit? The one acquisition you cite helped us do that. We bought a company called River a few years ago that was super focused on one problem, which was taking the enormity of the internet and optimizing it down into the skinny pipes that DSPs need to operate because of QPS and the dynamics of scale. That was perfect. It was a perfect fit. It was inside of our orbit. It was a great team. It was partially an acqui-hire as well for that reason. We love that. And we have a corp dev team that is out there talking to all kinds of companies all the time to try to find the next River, and we'll find it. But outside of that, we've also more recently made an investment into first-party capital because we recognize that our specialty at Index is not going to be speculating and investing in the best next brightest ad tech company because we're so focused on Index. However, there's a lot of really exciting companies emerging in ad tech right now that are building on platforms like ours, and we want to be close to that trend. And so that's sort of how we've bifurcated our M&A strategy more recently.
And why first-party capital and not Imperium?
Look, I love Kieran's humor. What can I say? Did you see the session earlier today? Like that was the big draw. Honestly, there's a few reasons. First and foremost, it's the team, and it's not just Kieran. He doesn't need any more ego support. But the team's great.
He just needs the money.
There's some really smart talent that it's no BS. They've sort of seen it before. They can very quickly tell if a company has a real team and a real problem and a real solution or not, which skips a lot of steps, which our own corp dev team, frankly, has spent so much time trying to get behind. Like, you can have a great pitch deck and a great one-sheeter and a great few meetings and then realize there's literally nothing there. And we've seen this so many times at Index as well on the corp dev side. The second, though, is access. What's really unique about what AI is doing to the next chapter of adtech, the new AI-first adtech company, is it's accelerating success rapidly. And this is sort of interesting. If you remove some of the friction, whether it be having to raise too much money or build a really robust platform and hit a level of scale to be successful, by building on top of the existing infrastructure, and you solve a really good problem, you can scale like crazy really, really fast, which means the time to invest is actually a new KPI. You want access to the richest, best startups with the best solutions as quickly as possible before they hit it, because as soon as they hit it, you're not going to be able to invest in them. And I think the team also just has demonstrated incredible access. They're really well known. Everyone's talking to them, and that was really compelling as well. So those were the two primary reasons. And we're seeing it even within the business, like even within what we're seeing on top of marketplaces. There's a few startups that 2-3 years ago we got to know that today have 100 people. And like that's just, we haven't seen that kind of scale before in ad tech. And I think that trend is also just going to keep going steeper and steeper, which is pretty cool.
And is there a benefit to, geography? They're based over here. They're not part of that kind of like New York set. Was that kind of an attraction in any way?
Absolutely, yeah. And frankly, like this next chapter of startup is more likely than not starting here now, which is kind of interesting. I think part of it is the dynamic at play, if you take GDPR and privacy, has forced businesses here to be a lot more creative, to do more with less, to deal with constraint. And if you can solve it here, ironically, it's a reverse to the old parallel. Chances are it's going to be just as successful in New York. Which wasn't always the case, because you can take a product that's spawned in the US that works really well there that might not work here, or the founding team might be allergic to something like the policy and regulation burden that would be GDPR. So I think like in a way, this market is helping entrepreneurs solve problems with more constraint, which is very transferable outside of this operating market.
I wanted to talk about your positioning of Index in 2025, and it seems like SSP is kind of going to become an extinct acronym. You're talking a lot more about the cloud techs, the infrastructure play, and building those kind of like vertical layers. What do we call that?
We don't know yet, is the long and the short of it, but change is
You need one for your S1 prospectus. So you gotta get this coming.
It's the benefit of picking your own timeline, I suppose. Look, I think I'm long enough, and I think many people in this room have been in this market long enough to remember a market before we had the term DSP and SSP, and we'll be here long enough to see what follows it. Change is in the air. I don't know what we're becoming. I don't know what this market is becoming. I just know it's going to continue to change. And I think what we're also recognizing, and it goes back to the comments earlier today, there's a lot of unnecessary expenses in ad tech that are on their way out or that need to go because they're holding back innovation. Every dollar that goes to GCP or AWS is not getting to the customer and is not going to funding really good and innovative ideas. And so I think as we start to reimagine this market, we might have new terms. They might not change that much, but we will have some new terms. And we're very much in the middle of this evolution. As Index, we know what we are. Our two most important problems are scale and efficiency. We're obsessed with both. It's a great privilege to process any dollar of media spend. It's not something that distracts us. When we go from processing our 2nd billion in a year to our 10th, it's not going to change our focus as a business. And we're going to do everything we can to live by what it means to be a platform. What does that turn us into? Hard to say, but it'll probably be different.
And is the USP that you're the lowest cost, that you're removing cost, that you're what? Because lowest cost can often mean lower quality. How do you kind of like balance all those things together into something super kind of succinct that people understand?
The pursuit of efficiency is linked to cost, but it isn't exclusively a cost-oriented dynamic. So if I were to take the custom bidding as a good example, for Index, we're making something that is cost prohibitive possible. To ping a model 500 billion times a day would put custom bidding companies literally out of business, just with 1 month of AWS bills. So we're making something impossible possible because of efficiency. Now that's in the compute parallel. In the commercials parallel, though, we are very efficient. We're linked more closely to something like Visa than say Uber. You ask any driver of Uber what they think of Uber, and they'll be like, how much time do you have? Because we hate Uber. It's hard to believe that they take 20 points on every fare, but they do. We're not Uber. We don't want to be Uber.
So what's the equivalent in adtech then of who's the Uber of adtech?
That's a good question.
Here a week. But I kind of mean that sensibly though, because. But how do you explain this proposition? I guess is what I'm trying to say. Someone asked here, which is what kind of compelled me to ask that question, is that you talk a good game about being on the edge of the impression and all of these kind of like complex engineering tasks and infrastructure tasks. And this person here was asking about, like, how do you explain that to the general advertiser? And I'm thinking about that question as the sales side and the demand side is kind of all becoming merged and all becoming one. And you've got GAM dining advertisers in New York, and you've got Magnite over here stealing advertiser spend. They're working directly with advertisers in a way that they hadn't before. So what's your kind of play in terms of how you make that all make sense into a compelling proposition for the buy side?
So our strategy is very different in that we are not trying to move sell and buy into one platform.
Okay.
And so it does put us kind of at odds with almost every other strategy in motion. And so again, we'll have to do a fact check in a few years on who was right on this one. But we're staying squarely on the sell side. What we're enabling is the modularization of value to seamlessly flow from one side of the transaction to the other so that customers gain choice and can compare. And then we think economics will decide which use cases will belong where. But it is a bit of a different strategy. We are not trying to merge buy and sell together. We think it's an error. It's an error we've seen as a market over the last 2 decades, and we don't think that's going to be the solution for the future. To the other part of your question, which I've somewhat forgotten now.
So have I. Should we move
What was the?
It was about how making a compelling proposition to advertisers.
Yeah, sorry,
I'm guessing that you kind of meet with advertisers.
So that's important. There's a change afoot, which is for us, a company focused entirely on the sell side. It's our only customer. We can't drop an MSA with a brand, or we can't take $1 directly onto index. More and more brand advertisers are reaching out to us than we've ever seen before. And it's really interesting, and it's been happening recently. And a lot of the conversations are about cost. What they find really interesting is that we process some of their dollars at distance to them, and they can gain access to the transactional logs on the exchange to complete the full loop. And they can actually start to understand where their money is going. And we're seeing more and more brands do this. Like Coca-Cola is a good example. They've been a little bit active in the trades and on the industry circuit. They've done a very, very exhaustive exercise right now to audit their entire programmatic supply chain. A lot of brands have taken notice of that, and they're now following suit. It doesn't require them to bring their budget onto index, but it does bring them closer than ever to supply. And in a lot of those conversations, they just want to learn. They want to learn what's happening. They want to learn what options they have. They think it's quite interesting that they can get away from activation costs that they otherwise thought were impossible by moving certain capabilities to the sell side. So what I'd say is we're increasingly fielding conversations with brands that a year, 2, 3 ago were not even happening. But we're not changing our position on staying on the sell side of the market.
Okay, back to the sell side. Someone here asked about how you help publishers navigate the AI era, and that kind of feeds into a question that I wanted to ask, because I'm hearing like a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt as it pertains to AI and publishing. Like I see it at my company. We're seeing, there's traffic drops. There's the fear of Google Zero. There's scrapers going to town on our content, which actually carries an infrastructure cost for us as well. How are you helping publishers in this environment? And it was kind of interesting just yesterday, like Google filed a court filing as part of of the adtech case that you're very familiar with. And they said that the open web is in rapid decline. All of this doesn't sound great for a traditional publisher that doesn't have a solid subscription business, run events, and everyone's trying to catch up and do lots of things, but ultimately this business model is undergoing severe change, and that's just been ramped up by AI and, as I say, the fear of Google Zero. Give us some reasons to be cheerful, but also how companies like Index and others in this space can help publishers navigate that? Because right now, like for some publishers, this is like an extinction level event.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we also have the social example to sort of compare to. Like when social changes were made by Facebook and Twitter and the like, it completely wiped out publishers. Like there's companies that don't exist anymore that were entirely dependent on that source of traffic. And so the threat and the stakes are very real. I would say for the Google filing that you cite, the specific quote was not that the web is, or the open web is in decline, but the open web display advertising
They've had
is
to
in decline.
refile it today because they made that mistake.
So,
apparently.
but in any event, I guess what I would say is the facts are the facts, and the facts I cited on the session earlier today, across the scale of the exchange that we see, the open web is huge. There are cohorts of publishers in decline, and there are cohorts of publishers in growth. But it is not universally in decline. The cohorts of publishers in decline, though, are in categories of company that are the most likely to be swallowed by AI. Anything that's topical, DIY, recipes, stuff like that, it is moving to overviews, and it's moving rapidly, and it is quite distressing. I think for publishers, this is the same advice I would have given them a year or two before this started to happen. If you do not have a compelling reason for somebody to come to you and your distribution is outsourced to search, you probably can't rely on that over the next few years to continue to sustain. And there are some publishers that are well positioned and there are some that are not. Those that have any form of distribution of their own, whether it be newsletters, whether it be type in traffic, are going to be a lot better positioned than those that entirely are outsourced distribution. I think a lot of media companies that recognize this early, though, are planning on going shopping. And I do think in some really weird way, we could actually see this full cycle of the internet repeat itself, which was back in the internet before Google search, everything was portals. There was a small number of names we all remembered and went directly to them. There is a chance it will swing back to that. And then, quite ironically, one of the best positioned publishers on the web right now is Yahoo. And they are doing incredibly well. So there is this really weird potential wheel that we might see happen. But I would say, in short, the impacts are not universal to all publishers in the open web. But the stakes are very high.
Mm-hmm. I'm being told we have to kill it, but thank you so much. Big round of applause for Andrew Casale. Let's go away with that. Thank you.